Hey everybody, welcome to Future Strike. Today we're going to be talking about character creation and how we're developing the hundreds of character concepts that will be needing to populate the world of Future Strike. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who haven't met us before, I'm Cliff.
And I'm Spencer. Happy Sunday.
So, like we talked about in episode 1, Future Strike is an idea that Spencer and I have been dreaming up and having for a little while now about a beat 'em up meets a fighting game with like almost 200 playable characters. Attentive listeners may recall that each playable character is also a level boss in the beat 'em up mode. And once you've beaten that boss, you actually can play as that character in your next run. But of course, in a beat 'em up game, it's about the bosses, but it's really also about the little goons that you have to fight wave after wave after wave of.
So to build the world, right, we're going to need like not only these 200 characters, but we're also going to need some interesting goon characters, right? And so you can see how the numbers start to grow.
Right. So for each and every boss, multiple goons that you're trying to generate.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that we're going to need a heck of a lot of characters. So guys, like if you want to have like a one sentence how-to for how to create hundreds and hundreds of characters and multiple levels for your game, an imagination and Stable Diffusion, and you can just crank out a ton of visual content to start bringing all the ideas to life.
Yeah, no, that's right. In fact, I'm also happy to do a technical episode where I just walk through everything that I use to work on Future Strike. And if that's of interest, like please, let us know in the comments, and happy to put that together.
That's awesome. We'll definitely be touching on like some of that stuff today in this episode, but like more than that, we're going to be talking about, just kind of the overarching process of how we got from just random to character creation. So, Spencer, why don't you set the scene for us? When does the story of your journey to Stable Diffusion really begin?
Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, so I think, the journey really starts when we started to think about Future Strike as like our own IP. So, we were talking about this in episode 1, that the original kind of genesis for Future Strike was kind of like, Uber Street Fighter game, like all the cast is there. And we were playing around with that idea. And, because I've already, we can see all of those characters basically, right? Like, at least I'm happy to just kind of, as we're imagineering it, think about game systems and playing around in spreadsheets and things like that. But then once we were like starting to think about kind of new characters, there really did come this point when it's like, okay, the next step is going to have to be artwork, right? It's like, we're talking about these character ideas, like I need to see them.
Right. No, I remember that. Well, yeah, it was like if we can actually see how some of these concepts how they visually looked on the screen, it would just, I think, be really, really cool. And we were like, oh, maybe that's just the thing, just a picture of like this character. And then I think at that same juncture, it was like, well, maybe that will urge us on to develop it further. I know that what we had done at that point, and please describe it in your words, but one of the ideas was sort of mashups of certain characters, like, I don't know, Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, but he's like a Yakuza gangster or like something, or different, right? Or the one I think that we had started with was Tyler Durden meets Ryu from Street Fighter.
Yeah.
So with that image in mind, I went ahead and I reached out and went onto the Fiverr app, right? I think is it an app? What do you call it? A platform?
Yeah, platform.
Whatever it is. And I, went out and recruited an artist and kind of walked them through this concept. It's like, okay, we want to do this. This is a fighting game meets beat 'em up. I contacted someone and gave them the kind of the log line of what the show is about, what the game is about. And can you do a character concept sketch of Tyler Durden meets Ryu in this pose.
Yep. And how did it go?
Listen, that person, I'm sure I'm sure that they're a lovely person and very, very talented, but it just didn't quite capture what either of us were hoping for, I would say.
No.
It was a little bit, I don't know. I thought it was just a little bit boring, honestly. And I will say, and you know, we may or may not use this clip, but I have friends who have used Fiverr to find artists for other projects,
Totally.
and they worked really, really well. So
Yeah.
we just at that point, though, I'll say, you know, at that point, Fiverr didn't quite work out, and we like kind of stopped for a second. It was like, okay, well, we'll think of something else. We'll find a person or something.
Yeah.
We kind of were.
I started looking on Upwork.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of with the challenge too, right? I mean, and this is like funny when this is your side hustle, right? Is it, I don't know, there's like this reluctance, I don't know, the kind of bar of like, okay, how much money am I going to shell out to, right? Until I'm kind of sure, or until I'm ready, until it feels like baked, right? And I want to make the most of the resources, but also like in a way, it's like I want to try to make the most of the artist's time who we would be hiring, right? And so I just think that it sort of created this barrier where that kind of seemed to like then go on the back burner. It was like, okay, we have this idea. This was fun. It hit kind of this wall.
So after we kind of gave up on Fiverr, what then happened?
Yeah. So I think I remember seeing Dall-E 2, like some story, like this is when kind of the stories were breaking in the news about Dall-E 2. Like, you know, I think if you were in the know with AI stuff, like you had seen it coming or whatever. But then, you know, there was this time, you know, 2022, I think, when I want to say it was like in the spring, right? It just started to appear in the news, right? It was like, oh, look at the stuff you can do. They started releasing the pictures and just reading about it, right? Going from text to like image that looks like an artist drew it or whatever, or looks like a photograph. I was like, this would be perfect. Can I just type in, you know, Ryu meets Tyler Durden, you know what I mean, in a stance or whatever. And like, can it show me like a rendering of that? And so that was really exciting. But of course it wasn't open to the public, but I was able to find like earlier kind of like online versions. Like there's this one called Craiyon, which I used that was like cool to start to get a sense of like how it works. And I'll throw up some examples of it, but it's like the output was, you know, it's not.
It was funky.
Yeah. It just like, you know, the best you can say of it is that it's like, oh, okay, it's like kind of sort of expressing something about like what I had in mind, you know?
Yeah, and at that point too, I think I remember the prompts. It was also a matter of like figuring out the whole idea of this, what the prompt is going to be. It's like different words, where you put the certain words in the prompt changes things drastically. I think that was the case with Craiyon, right?
Yeah. So all these text to image things, I can imagine that there are particular prompts that they're really good at, and prompts that they're not so good at. And the ones that I was giving them, like it wasn't doing much with. So, you know, I generated some stuff, but you know, it wasn't enough to keep it really exciting. Then when I put my name on the list for the Dall-E 2 beta, but then when I finally got into that, I started doing the same thing there, and it was better. Like the outputs you could get out of Dall-E 2 were definitely better than Craiyon, but because you were limited in terms of like how many basically like prompts you could put in before you had to start buying credits, like again, it was kind of like it wasn't so thrilling what I was getting back that I was like, okay, I'm going to pay more. And it wasn't really until Stable Diffusion came out where it was like, oh, I could install this on my own system, you know what I mean? And just like do, you know, I'm only limited basically by like how like many hours there are in the day. Like now that started to get interesting.
So walk us through Stable Diffusion. I mean, I was kind of there. I remember we would have calls all the time and, oh my God, check this out. Oh, look at this. And it's like, huh. And then as time went on, start at sort of the beginning. Just walk us through your memory of Stable Diffusion.
Yeah. So I found an article online that step by step said, look, here's how you can get Stable Diffusion going on your system. You got to do some stuff with like GitHub, and you know, it's not super easy, but it was also not like, you know, it was one of the things where I read, I was like, oh, okay, I can follow these steps, right? Follow the steps, lo and behold, you can do it. I'm putting like writing Python code or whatever. And then it started to get really interesting. Then it was like, okay, write in a prompt, get back a result, right? And do another one, and do another one, and do another one. And you can really start iterating on it. But in the beginning, yeah, as I showed you, the outputs that we're getting from the prompts, and I was sort of putting in, I think the one that I started testing a lot was Kamasi Washington as a jazz wizard in like Street Fighter style. Like that was kind of the prompt I wanted to give it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can sort of do that and you get back stuff. And again, I'll put up some of the examples from like some of those early runs if I still have them. And again, but it was still in that zone of like, this is cool. And it's kind of something you could tell it was better, you know, but it wasn't really there yet. But I remember, I can't remember exactly now how it happened, but I remember there was one night when I was just like playing around with these things and playing around. I started learning about like the random seed that you give it.
Right.
And somehow I started realizing that like I could start to see the relationship between a seed and the result, and I could change the prompt and it would sort of stay in a zone. And certain seeds were just better than others. And then I remember like calling you up at like, I think it was like 11 o'clock, or might even been close to like midnight my time. Cause like I had done a run and all of a sudden I was starting to get back stuff and I was like, whoa, this is starting to look like a comic book cover. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It really started to move in that zone where it's like, oh, wait a second. Like it's, things are coming to life. And that was really exciting.
I remember that night when you called and it was like, holy mackerel. These look like, not only do they look like something, they're like expressing something. And these characters are slightly like indelible almost, you know?
Yeah. So it was interesting. I mean, like in the beginning, I was still sticking with this idea. Like one of the ways that, you know, had sort of fleshed out the like matrix of characters, right? So the idea is we have to have all these characters, they have to match all these archetypes, you know, like we talk about in episode 1. And the way that we sort of started to flesh them out would be like, oh, okay, so it was things like, oh, the Kamasi Washington jazz wizard, right? There will be the, you know, Brad Pitt's Ryu, Tyler Durden, you know, character, right? And so, you know, those are great prompts to put into these systems, right? Because it's like, okay, well, I want to see a rendering of the person's face, but not quite, you know, with these extra elements. And you kind of have to figure out like the magic words or whatever to do it. But I started just iterating a lot with these, like I found these sets of seeds and then I would sort of say like, oh, I had this kind of like random system almost where it was like, okay, take this celebrity and this, you know, kind of like, you know, warrior type, right? And do it in this style and then just kind of like generate it, right? And you can start to see like all these faces. And it was really sort of, I don't know, for my brain at least, like it was pretty addicting because it's just like, holy crap, like all of a sudden, you know, all these things that are in my mind, right, can like become, you know, pixels, I guess.
Well, I know that like we had definitely taken, you know, weeks and weeks at one point and just kind of plopped in to like a spreadsheet, like as many locations as we could think of.
That's right. Yeah. All
Just
the different like battlegrounds.
Concert, you know, this, that, the other thing, all these millions and millions of different like level designs, which I'm sure informs, it's like, okay, how can this all like flow together as a coherent
Totally
level? And what's each little stage within that level?
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember too, we had an idea at one point, and I think it was just building on the kind of Street Fighter World Warrior, right? Where it's like there's going to be different locations or cities around the world and people are there. And I still have some like kind of like projects from that time of just kind of like putting together the visual look for like all these different locations. But then I think it was, and then there'll be these different settings in all these different locations. So we had thought about that. But I can't remember what inspired me. It must have been something we were playing or talking about. But one night, I remember I kind of had this like flash of an idea about like, well, what if rather than it being like just kind of traveling from place to place, like you can imagine this world where it's like these kind of layers, right? Like you're sort of climbing this tower where you start in kind of like the underground, you know, hellscape, right? And then you move up a floor, you know, to the garbage dump, and then you move up a floor to, you know, the sewer, right? And it's this kind of thing where, and as you move up the floors, it kind of gets like greasing like affluent and then like surreal, right? It was like, okay, cool. So you could kind of have this thing, and that's where all the characters are. Is a way of kind of like almost like simplifying the the story. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, to me that, part of it feels very Slay the Spire
Maybe
kind
that's what
of.
it was. Maybe we had played exactly like that. Yeah.
I mean, or also too, like, the I don't think you've seen this, but Snowpiercer, you're in the back of the train, and it's where all the dregs of society unfortunately live, and then they fight their way through to the front of the train, to the engine of this long, long train, and then that's where all the horrible rich people live, and they
Nice.
don't want you to get up there, because then you see that they're really living off of the horrible conditions back there, exploiting all those people.
Right.
But anyway, let's get back to this here.
No,
So
but yeah, but that was it. And then
yeah.
when I then finally shifted to landscapes, I had that idea in my mind, right? And so then the prompts went from like, you know, yeah, person at, person as a ninja, person as a, medieval warrior kind of thing, like celebrity, to, trying to articulate these ideas for like, and people can go on the Obsidian page now and like see kind of where we have landed with the levels, right? But it's like, oh, you start in this post-apocalyptic pit, and then you move into the junk city, and then you move into the farm, and this we sort of built this sequence. And then in terms of thinking about the setting, it was like, okay, cool. So like, what does a post-apocalyptic farm on the outskirts of a ruined city look like? And literally, you can just type that into Stable Diffusion with the right prompt, and like that one was like, it literally was like the first thing I just typed that out, and it came back with like great images. I think that I'm still like iterating on them, but it just sort of came back and was like, yep, like that's what that is. Like perfect.
What's kind of great about level design, I feel, or at least these conceptual level design, I guess,
Yeah.
is that to me anyway, some of that, I don't know, wrongness that AI images create, like that, where things don't quite make sense, where like the corners don't quite work, or a window is like a window, it's like inside and outside, and like things aren't really quite how they really are. To me, it gives it a really cool vibe. It
Yeah.
makes it unreal, it makes it surreal, and
Yeah.
to me it adds to it. So as a surrealist,
It totally works like as concept art, I think.
yeah,
Like, right. I mean, the whole point is that it just needs to express something to you. And then it's like, look, yeah, it's supposed to spark in your imagination the scene. It's not the
yep,
scene itself. You know what I mean? Like, this is right. It's a concept work, but it's like, cool. I see it now. Right. And as you say, right, like the uncanniness, in some ways, the errors, right?
yeah,
Not in all cases. In some cases, it's just like that doesn't work. But in some cases, it's like it actually adds interest. Like you're like, whoa, because like you see that it's a tree, and then you look closer and you're like, the bark is not correct, you
yeah,
know. But like it doesn't matter because it's expressed the idea of bark, and then as you look at it, it makes it interesting.
right. I mean, and two, like I know that going back to the characters, that we're always, whenever you're showing me your newest people or characters or creatures or monsters, it's like, which one is the most exciting, which one is the
Yeah.
boss?
Yeah.
And that's it's an interesting exercise, because who knows, it's subjective, but there's somehow once in a while, you'll see one and you'll say, oh no, that's the boss, that's the scary one.
Yeah. That's the goal. I mean, I think that's what I'm shooting for. At least like, I want that to be the like fat part of the bell curve, for characters. Like sometimes maybe the boss is the one that looks the most like serene or something like that, right?
Right.
But I mean, the goal is that like every boss character, when you see them, both in concept, but then also like in game, right? You want it to be this like exciting moment, right? That particularly that first time, it's just like, whoa, like what is this person going to do, right? You want to feel that in a way that when you encounter them, and this is how we're kind of thinking about the goons are all kind of like, baby versions of the boss, right? They're just like less good. But they kind of still have the same shapes and things like that, right? So you kind of recognize them as that boss, so that as you're playing them and beating up the goons, you're kind of learning how the boss works a little bit. But then when you see the boss, it's like something special is coming, right? And you kind of want it to have that feeling.
Right. And I know too that one of the fun things, this is kind of a trope in the beat 'em up games, is like the names of each goon.
Yeah.
When you're beating up like 15 guys that all have like a backwards hat and no shirt on and like a crowbar. It's like this one's bingo and this one's jingo and this
Yep.
one's dingo and this one's lingo. And as you're punching bingo and lingo, the names are switching in the little fight bars
Exactly.
up
You got
there.
to have that. Got to have the palette swaps, like on them or whatever. So there's like, yeah. Um, totally. That's part of the fun, right? It's like that's what makes creating 1,000 characters entertaining, right? Because if it was just like I need 1,000 different like nameless like slug monsters, it's just like I don't know. That doesn't get my juices flowing, but it's like no, I need like 1,000 characters within this like system, and they all have to have like funny names and like who are they? Then it
No,
gets to be yeah.
it's true. Well, I guess, imagine if in every Koopa guy that you jumped on in Mario had its own identity. Like
Yeah.
I would think about that game a lot differently. So Spencer, as you like got into you were in Stable Diffusion, you were tinkering around, you were iterating on stuff, like talk a little bit about how you tried to find a style. What were you looking for as far as like finding a style, I guess, for these character designs?
Yeah. So I mean, in the beginning, I was literally like typing in like in the style of like Street Fighter 3 or like Guilty
Mm-hmm.
Gear, just like trying to find something that like when I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's a fighting game character.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Um, those didn't work great. Like it does something, but those like terms didn't capture like in the earlier, I think I started with 1.2. No, maybe it was 1.4. I can never remember. But the first model of Stable Diffusion I worked with, it didn't work so well. But what's really cool about the community is like there really is this like community of people who use Stable Diffusion who are like generating knowledge and sharing it about like how it works. And there were these resources that had like all these artists whose like names you could put in and they had been tested to be like, look, just say like portrait by so and so, and here's examples, and you can kind of see like so and so's style. I started using some of those resources, and we'll link them in the description. But I started kind of basically picking out artists and being like, okay, I want a little bit of this and a little bit of this, right? And so I had this kind of like list of like 11 artists that I would just kind of like move in and out. And some of them I had never even heard before, these comic artists, whose work, like, or I should say, I mean, their work is great. When you add their name to Stable Diffusion, you actually don't really get their work, but you get something about it, right? Like something about the lines or something like this. And it was really just kind of like piecing together, like, yeah, these 11 different artists that swap them in and out. And then it just started to kind of like when a picture would come up, I'd be like, oh, like, this is interesting. Like, who is this person? Right. Like, that's kind of what I was always looking for. It's like those shots where you're just like, whoa, like, this is this person's got something to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, I'm sure too that you were trying to, and what's becoming apparent is that all these characters are sort of contiguous or consistent, and you could imagine them all living in one giant universe, I guess. It's like, how could like Mrs. Mouse, Mouse Lady, be existing in the same universe as like a weird farmer wizard and another, robotic cyborg, kind of getting that look to be consistent
Yeah.
across it, so that these are all part of the same, that they all exist in the same vast universe, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's the challenge. I mean, it's been really fun. And it's one of the things that, again, like makes Stable Diffusion, I think, such a powerful piece of technology is that I've actually done now, I think I'm on my third, I mean, it's not even worth counting, but at least my third like iteration. Like I have kind of this like all the characters, all the boss characters, I actually created like an image of like a headshot that I liked to express an idea. And I've actually gone back over them with different models, applying different styles, like tweaking them all, kind of move them in the direction where it's like, okay, it doesn't just look like, 200 kind of random characters, but rather, as you said, like 200 characters kind of from a world, right? In a style that also like expresses the kind of like feeling that I want Future Strike to have, right? Which is like, like what a fighting game beat 'em needs to have. Like it needs to look impactful. It needs to be exciting, right? There needs to be movement, it needs to like carry a certain weight. And so that's kind of the goal.
Let me ask you this question. While you were doing all this and you were just, arm deep in Stable Diffusion character creation, like, did you start dreaming in like character images or headshots, or like wake up and like have it in your mind, or you know what I mean? Did it affect your dreams?
You know what? I don't think it messed with my dreams, but it was definitely like every free minute. You know what I mean? It was just like, I need to get back there. Like it's this weird thing about like, yeah, sort of realizing the potential of really being able to like create and bring into visual reality like a world of your imagination.
And
Um,
at such a scale too. I think it seemed
yeah,
like, because like every time we would talk, it'd be like every couple days or a week or something, and it's like, check it out, I have like 75 more pictures, and I'm
yeah.
like, what? Like this is like 10 years worth of work.
It's crazy. I mean, really, when you think about like what is possible now,
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, it's one of the things that really inspired me to want to, I mean, even start doing this YouTube series, right? Because it's just like, okay, look, like this is actually, I'm going to use the phrase, I think that this is actually like an inflection point in creative possibility, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
like previously you would never even attempt something like what we're talking about, right? Because you just be like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, cool in theory, but just like you would kill people, like, you know what I mean? To even to make it a product, or unless it was like, we're going to do this for the next 20 years, you know what I mean?
Right.
Right? It's like, then okay, but like that's no fun. Like, first of all, and just like who knows what is going to last 20 years in media, right? But like if you could actually create a game like this, like with a reasonable in a reasonable time frame with reasonable pressure on the creators, right? And that's what this makes possible, right? Like you couldn't even do like what I've already done was not possible, right?
No
That is, I
way.
mean, that's kind of what we're talking about today, is like being able to create like 200 or more, like hundreds of characters basically in kind of a coherent world, and like build them a setting and start to do all of this and kind of like realize it, you know, as a, at this point, like just like a visual work, like forget about it. You know, it's a lifetime, right, of
Mm-hmm.
work that now, you know, I've done in like a few months. It's amazing.
Great. Well, I mean, I think, there's so much more to talk about on this subject. And I think we have a lot to talk about what's next now that the Future Strike project is at this point in its inception and creation.
Yep.
So stay tuned, everybody. Everybody out there, like just let us know if you've been using Stable Diffusion. If you'd like some more sort of technical tutorials or get more into the weeds about like really how this stuff works, because this was I'd say pretty high level, but if I'm sure there's a much more in the weeds type of chat we could do.
Yeah,
So
yeah. This is just kind of reviewing like how we got there. Like you said at the top, the answer is Stable Diffusion, really, is how you like can create all this stuff with your
mhm.
imagination. But happy to kind of like get much, much more into the, you know, literally here's what you click if people
Right.
are interested. So let us know.
Excellent. So, all right, everybody. Well, until next time, like, subscribe. Don't forget to click the bell as well. And until next time.